So I got a comment on one of my very old Hunter x Hunter videos that starts off with the following sentence. Hunter x Hunter is a boring story that barely has a plot. And, I get comments like that for a lot of the series that I celebrate through my videos a lot, that have slowly but surely across the years made me form a philosophy based off of the idea of barely having a plot, or the idea of plotting in stories, or how important a plot is. So I thought this kind of stimulated me to think, let's make a video about this, because I think this is something that I've grown to think over the years that I think is an interesting topic. So, I think that I have a very distinct way of thinking about the structure of stories and the components therein. I think any given story, sorry if I'm looking over to the side, for this video I actually have a couple of notes, which is kind of funny because I usually never do, unless it's for rankings. But I have an idea of what encapsulates a story, and I think it has several components, of which, so I'll list them and I'll quickly explain them. The first one is character writing and dynamics. So basically character writing and how characters bounce off one another and how different relationships are formed, and basically just the skill of writing characters within their respective roles for their given story. So for example, under character writing, it seems like a given, but I kind of have to distinguish it because of the next topic. So for character writing, the way that Gon's character has these elements and foreshadowing and bits of, I guess, light Hunter x Hunter spoilers. The way that Gon's character has lots of foreshadowing about his inevitable spiraling in Chimera Ant, and how the warning signs are there, and what that informs you about Jing and his relationship with Killua, and how that leads to so many important payoffs, and what that says about the themes of the story and how it all coalesces with the detour idea. I've talked about this in previous videos, but essentially all that is what I consider to be character writing. And then how that element of Gon then is brought about, it brings about things in other characters, like Kurapika, or Killua, or whatever. Basically how a writer writes a character's role in the story, how well fleshed out it is, how well thought out it is, how it interacts with the other relationships and dynamics. Character writing and dynamics, that's what that is. Pretty simple. The next component I would say is characterization. Now, I think this is different from character writing and dynamics because you can plot out, you can write out and plan out character writing and dynamics. At this point in the story, this character will learn this, which will add this layer to their psychology, which will then add to this theme. That is kind of what I mean by character writing. It'll inform their relationship with X, whatever. That's what I think is character writing. Characterization is the actual, I guess, moment-to-moment psychology and character traits of the characters. So, continuing on with the Gon example, Gon's characterization is that he's very stubborn. He is an enhancer. He is very one-minded and tunnel-visioned, but at the same time is very sweet and idealistic and hopeful, and the way that he is such a beautiful soul who is so inviting to other people and loves with such reckless abandon. The sort of personality traits and psychology and characterization moment to moment. Because it's all well and good to say this character will go through this will add this layer to them, it'll be great for this theme, and it'll be great for this relationship and dynamic with this other character, but I think characterization is kind of what enhances all of that, and it's kind of the micro to the character writings and dynamics macro. I think you need kind of both to be really great for overall really great character work in a story. And if I don't think that Gon's personality and psychology on a moment-to-moment basis and his relationships are endearing or compelling or whatever, if I'm not engaged with the character in their conversations and in their actions throughout the story in terms of their characterization, I will not care much about their writing. I've had series where, yeah, I guess the writing's well planned out, the concepts are good, yeah, it's like, it's thought out, it's oh my god, sorry. Holy crap. It's well done. But I don't really care about the character that much because the characterization isn't really there. I think characterization is really, really essential for helping the audience really grasp onto the character and be hooked by them. So I think that's as essential as character writing, and I think they're two sides of the same coin. A great example of characterization pluses is, when you read a story, and maybe the plot hasn't really gotten going, or the story hasn't gotten going, and there isn't anything super deep yet, but you just adore the personalities of the characters. A great example of this for me is Itchy the Witch. I recently had a stream where I read Itchy the Witch, the first 10 chapters of it. And there are some really cool world-building concepts, some really cool themes. It's well done in that aspect, but the plot hasn't really super gotten going. And I keep saying the plot, which is funny because we'll get to that. The story hasn't really super gotten going in terms of the dynamics and the meat of the story, I think. But what it does have is really great characterization. These characters are so adorable. They're so endearing. They have these really cute comedic scenes and really cute chibi panels where your heart just increases in size because you just think they're so lovable and so cute. That is why the sorry, my iTunes are just screwed up. We're doing it live, folks. That is why and where I think characterization can be really, really great. Okay, there we go. We're back with iTunes. That's why characterization can kind of carry while you wait for other elements to sort of compensate or bleed into the narrative and take the forefront more. But in the meantime, characterization can really be great. So that's the second component. There's character writing and dynamics, then there's characterization. Third, to me, is setting. Setting, the world building, the aesthetics of the setting, the atmosphere, the, I guess, socioeconomics, if the series wants to do that. Some series have a big setting focus. For example, The Witcher 3, Cyberpunk 2077, Hunter x Hunter, One Piece, Final Fantasy XIV, Final Fantasy VII Re-Trilogy, Final Fantasy IX. Lots of grand, sprawling epics tend to have a big setting focus. A Song of Ice and Fire, Lord of the Rings, stuff like that. Now, I think setting is actually something that isn't really necessary to have a great story. I think that lots of my favorite stories do not actually have a big setting focus. I love when there's a setting focus. I love losing myself in their worlds. However, I do not necessarily need that to love a story. For example, Haikyuu. Haikyuu really doesn't really dwell on its setting all that much, but it's, as of the past top 100 lists, basically tied for my #1 story of all time. And it doesn't really have a big setting focus at all. Obviously, there is some setting stuff, but it isn't nearly as important as a lot of the other dynamics of the story. The theming, the character dynamics and character writing, the characterization. So yeah, setting, I do love it, and it kind of is a big part of vibes fiction, which I've talked about before, and especially in video games, I really love a great setting to lose myself in. And another one is Berserk, I guess. Berserk has a really big setting focus in a lot of ways. However, it's not necessary for a masterful story. That's the third one. The fourth one I would say is presentation. Now, this is the way in which all of these, sorry, let me not do presentation yet. Let me do theming. Themes or theming. The ideas being the ideas of the story that are executed through the characters, the plot, the story, how it all comes together. The way that Hunter x Hunter gets across the Detours theme through all of its elements. Both the ideas and, I guess, the execution and how they're communicated of those ideas. Theming, pretty simple. I think most of my favorite stories, the vast majority of my favorite stories, have theming as a big part of it. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean theming is something I always look for, always need. For example, Xenoblade Chronicles has a very big theme focus, but what I take away from it is not the themes. I don't really care too much about the themes. I think they're good, they're well done, but they don't resonate with me as much as the setting, or presentation, or the character writing, or the characterization, or the plot. So, themes, again, I think a really well fleshed out story, the vast majority of the time needs to have, not all the time, but often, very often, needs to have a good theme focus, very good theming. But that doesn't necessarily mean that I'm always going to be enamored with the theming. I just think it needs to be there to sort of round out the story, which I think is, I think most of you would have probably agree with. So that's 4. 5 would be presentation. the way in which all these elements, all these disparate elements, the theming, the character work, character writing and dynamics, the characterization and the setting, the way in which, and setting also encapsulates atmosphere, like I said, the way in which all of those are communicated and expressed, the way in which they are presented. So, for example, voice acting can really enhance a character writing or a character dynamic. For example, very good atmospheric music can really enhance a setting. For example, really good prose in a book, in a novel, can really enhance characterization, for example. So, depending on the medium, presentation kind of differs. In manga, it's the panel flow and the illustrations and the prose and the use of the medium, kind of like how Kubo does it, for example, or the dynamism of the panels, kind of like panel flow. In novels, a lot of it's the prose and some other elements. In TV shows, it's the direction, or movies, it's the visual direction and the acting. And in most audiovisual mediums, music is a huge factor. In anime specifically, the way that the animation comes across, the way that the animation is done. So it depends on the medium, but essentially, the way that these ideas and this story is enhanced and through expression, using whatever methods of the medium are necessary, are applicable. I think that's pretty self-explanatory. Some stories have really great presentation that in some ways maybe compensates or enhances what would not hit as hard without it. Well, actually, that happens all the time with great presentation, but would be maybe lacking without it, or not as masterful without it. Sometimes presentation is like the most important part of a story because of how it enhances everything. I would actually say Attack on Titan Season 1, the presentation is unbelievable there, and arguably the most important element of it. I think there are a bunch of stories where you could say the presentation is really as essential, like the voice acting, the music, the direction, the storyboarding, the prose, is the writing in terms of the dialogue, is all as important as those other elements. So those are the 5 I've said so far, and I have 6 total. So again, character writing and dynamics, characterization, setting, presentation, theming, and the last one, not because it's the least important, but the last one, and the point of this video, I guess, well, the title of this video, we talked 13 minutes without talking about it much, is plot. Plot is essentially just the bare bones, or not, but the skeleton of what happens, the series of events that happens in a story. Using the Hunter x Hunter example, Gon goes out to search for Jing. He takes the Hunter exam. He meets Kurapika and Leorio. It's a series of events that happen, almost bullet point, in a story. And to me, it is the least important element of a story. I would say setting is the second least important element of a story, but I would also, but I would say plotting is my least, for me, the least important. For me personally, and also just, I think in general. When someone says Hunter x Hunter barely has a plot, it's not that I don't understand what they mean, because Hunter x Hunter is very stream of consciousness. It's very focused on the character work. It's a character piece, but it also puts the setting at the forefront, and it has all these vibrant, rich ideas that Togashi wants to get across, and those take the forefront much more, and the presentation as well, whether it be anime or manga, and those take the forefront much, much more than the series of events that happen. It's a series of detours. In York New, Kurapika's trying to go after the Phantom Troop, and Gon and Killua want to make sure he doesn't lose himself, and the spider is trying to do all, like, the plot isn't actually that important. It's the stuff that happens surrounding the skeleton of the plot. It's the meat on the bones. It's the connective tissue. It's all that enriches the things that happen, rather than the actual things that happen. Just to interject here, I talk a lot in this video and phrase the idea of plot repeatedly as the series of events that happen, like the skeleton of events that happen in the plot, is the plot. And I just want to clarify that I'm aware that there is more to plot than just this happens, then this happens, then this happens, then this happens. It's also the structuring of that. It's the way that reveals are built up to. It's the way that that sort of seeds are planted, the flow of events, the order that things are revealed in terms of backstories or maybe using time in interesting ways. It's the way that seeds are planted to show to provide your attention to a certain element of a character, to then unveil that in a later chapter 100 years later, 100 years, chapters later. It's the formatting. There's more to plot than the series of events that happen. There's also plotting, which is the way that is formatted and executed and how that comes about in the story. So some of you may have been thinking there's more to it than just the skeleton events that happen in the story, and I realize that the way I talk about it makes it seem like I don't acknowledge that, so I'm just acknowledging that here. I was a bit one-dimensional in the way that I talked about plot here, and I am aware that there's more to it. However, in spite of that, I think that all of that is fantastic and can be a huge additive contributor to a story, and yet it is one of the least important elements of story, because I think masterful stories can result from there being a lack of plot, a lack of really complex, or a lack of plot focus, if the other elements compensate. And same with setting, as I've kind of alluded to. So, there are definitely stories for which the plot is incredible and enhances the story. Monster is one of the best plots I've ever seen. One of the best plots in video game history is Final Fantasy VII, because sometimes plot twists that recontextualize the whole story can be unbelievable, can enhance it so much. I think Attack on Titan has arguably the best plot I've ever seen. It's incredibly layered, it's incredibly dense, it informs you and recontextualizes certain elements of the characters and themes, and it is just such a thrilling, incredible plot. Xenoblade Chronicles, one of my favorite plots ever. The twists and turns and the thrills and how they lead to such unbelievable payoff, and how it recontextualizes things and keeps you guessing and all that. Haikyuu has a really excellent plot, not in the traditional way, but the plotting in Haikyuu is more so how Furudate plants sort of these character seeds that then, there's something that happens earlier on that then is slowly being paid off as the character grows, and at this point in the story, this plot point has this sort of payoff, and you can see it referenced through the chapter titles. I digress. Another great plot is Final Fantasy X. So, and that enhances the story. So lots of amazing stories have great plots that enhance the story, but I think plot to me is the least important element, in that I can have a middling plot or a plot that is not impressive at all, but if the other elements are really good, I still have a favorite. For example, Red Dead Redemption 2's plot. It's not much to speak of, really. I don't think it's super complex or layered. I don't think there's a lot of moving parts. There's some twists, but I think it's relatively very simple. And if you just look at the events that happen, it's nothing too impressive, really. I could see that with Hunter x Hunter as well. I could see that with The Last of Us, one of the most important video games of all time, and a lot of people's favorite, has a very bare bones plot, I think. And I think the thing with that is that the plot is the element of the story that can be compensated for or enhanced, for which a very simple one can be enhanced the most out of everything else. I could see other people saying setting as well. I think setting and plot. But for the purpose of this video, so when people say that it barely has a plot, a story barely has a plot, so it sucks, or its plot is very simple, so it sucks, I look at that and I go, well, I see what you mean, but is that really a problem? Because look at the other components and how they sort of compensate for that. Maybe a story just isn't trying to be plot-focused. And a lot of times that's fine, and it can still be masterful. I have 6 elements of a story that I just listed out for you. I think that a lot of times, character... for me personally, for it to be like a masterpiece, I think there are very good stories that can get away with doing 3 or 4, maybe 4 of these. For a story to be masterful, I think it has to be incredible in 5 out of 6 of these, sometimes 6 out of 6. But plot is the one that often falls by the wayside, in that if it doesn't have a plot focus, that's okay, and I can still think it's one of the greatest things I've ever experienced without a huge plot focus. Again, another one of my favorite video games of all time, The Legend of Zelda Twilight Princess. It has a twist or two, but really, the series of events that happen, the plot that happens, it isn't anything crazy. I think it's good. I don't think it's great or masterful, and I think that story is the masterpiece of all masterpieces, similar to Cyberpunk 2077. So yeah, I guess what I wanted to get across is, to me, the plot is the least important aspect of a story. I still love great plots. They can still accentuate and enhance stories to make them masterful. In the case of Attack on Titan, for example, in the case of Evangelion, stuff like that. Bleach has a great plot, but they really aren't the be-all and end-all. I don't think One Piece has much of a plot to speak of. Lots of Detours Media doesn't seem to. So yeah, I guess that was my point. Kind of trying to get across the components of stories, my 6 components of stories, and I really, really think that, kind of to my point earlier, I kind of cut myself off a bit, I kind of need characterization to really, really adore a story. I kind of need character writing and dynamics. Theming, I really do enjoy great theming. Presentation, I love great presentation, and there have been stories that I think have 4 of the elements, for example, or maybe even 5, but kind of fall flat for me because the presentation does not really work. I'm not going to get into the specifics of that, but there have been multiple stories throughout the years that I go, man, on paper, I should really love this, but it's just presented in a way that doesn't engage me, and it kind of falls flat. So presentation is essential. Setting and plot are the 2 least important, and I say setting's more important because I think if the setting is badly done or very, very simple, sometimes other elements can fall flat more so than if a plot is very simple. Whereas a great setting and a great plot both enhance masterful story and can lead to masterful stories, I think the negatives of a very bad setting or very simple setting are more, you can feel them more, for me personally, than the negatives of a bad plot. But either way, regardless, let's just say those are the 2 least important ones. And my point is that I think plot is overrated. I think that people look at stories and they say, boom, you have to have great characters, you have to, boom, check. You have to have great characters, boom, check, you have to have a great, character arcs, boom, check, you have to have great theming, boom, check, you have to have a great plot. Whereas I don't look at stories that way. I just said for me personally, I very often need to have character dynamics and character writing, themes, characterization, and presentation, and that tends to just be the pattern for me, but it's not something I look at as a checklist. All stories need this, or else they are bad, or they can't be good. Stories are so much more beautiful and flexible and imaginative and creative and boundless. You are limiting yourself so much by doing the checklist approach of it needs to have this, otherwise it can't be good. I'm just speaking from personal experience about the things I like, the things at the highest end. So when someone says this story has no plot or has a very simple plot, or the plot is nothing to write home about, look at the other components, because oftentimes people don't love a story for stories that don't really focus on plot all that much. People don't really love that story because they think it has an amazing plot. Because there are so many different ways that stories can be incredible, and I think, to me, personally, plot is the least important one. Something else worth noting about this is the opposite is true as well. So for example, I've been talking about how if a plot is bad or mid or whatever, and the other elements compensate for it, or if the plot isn't the focus and the other elements compensate for it, then I can still have a masterful work that I love very deeply. But something approaching the opposite is true as well, that I think is notable, where plot-focused stories, or stories where the plot is exceptional or really impressive, actually sometimes really do not hold up. If the other elements don't compensate. So this is an interesting example. Super Mario Sunshine. I think the gameplay's fun, but incredibly unpolished, so I wouldn't call it masterful or anything like that. I think the characterization is fun, but simple. The character work, there really isn't much to speak of at all. But what it excels in so well is presentation and atmosphere and setting. So setting specifically, and that is enough for it to be a delight for me. I adore Super Mario Sunshine, but something else where it's kind of similar to that, whereas it excels in plot, is the German TV series that a lot of people love called Dark. I tried out Dark a few years ago because I got a bunch of recommendations for it, and I was really impressed by it technically. I think the plot is incredibly well laid out, well foreshadowed, incredibly complex and deep and interesting. I think the visual direction is great, the presentation is really good. But the problem is I never connected with any of the characters. I could never look at these characters and be like, yeah, I am overwhelmed and hooked by the characterization. I didn't find them very likable. I didn't find the dynamics interesting. I didn't find them emotionally or intellectually compelling. And because I just wasn't invested in the characters, and because I don't think the show really, in its introductory episodes, excelled in characterization or character dynamics, I did not vibe with the show, and I dropped it without even finishing season 1. And people think that's a masterpiece. And that's why. So I think that sometimes when a plot is a focus, if other elements aren't good with it, it can fall by the wayside more so than if other elements are the focus, like a character piece, or in some ways a setting piece sometimes, you know? So I think that's worth noting as well. And obviously, if you love Dark, I totally get that. It's just my personal experience with it and my personal take. It wasn't for me. I didn't think it was super good because I think it fell apart for me personally when it came to the character stuff. Hopefully that got across pretty decently well, and you know what I mean. Let me know what you think about plot. I know people disagree with me and some need a great plot, but for me personally, I don't. I don't at all. And I think that a lot of my favorite stories are simple plots enhanced by the other components around them, and how they're presented, and the meat on the skeleton of the plot. So yeah, let me know what you think about that. That's something I've come to think throughout the years, come to really feel about stories quite strongly. But I know everyone's different, so feel free to share your thoughts. Anyways, that's all I got for today. Thank you very much for watching, and have a good one.